It's time now for the John Harris Podcast on the AirNetwork.net. Now, here's sports journalist extraordinaire, John Harris on the Air Network.
Welcome to the John Harris Podcast here on the AirNetwork.net. I'm John Harris, joined today by Dave Herrin, the originator of the Tendex statistical basketball rating system, the Tendex guru. I like to say the best basketball statistical rating system out there. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
I'm good. We've got some interesting material to work with here today. Last night was the NBA draft lottery. The order is set now for the top 14 picks in the next month's NBA draft. And it seems like a good time to match up Tendex and look at some of these picks. And I've been hearing a lot of names bandied about last night. I guarantee that some of the Tendex names are not going to be the same, and I think that's what makes Tendex so interesting, is that it doesn't follow the traditional pattern that you're going to hear from all the draft experts and media members over the next month or so, and who should be number one or who should be this or who should be that. And let's look at the top three of the draft lottery, the order, Dave. Number one, Boston, number two, the LA Lakers, and number three, Philadelphia. And let's try to, from a Tendex perspective, let's try to match those top three picks up. How does Tendex look at the top three picks or the top three rated players? And then we'll look at it from a realistic standpoint, maybe how those teams will actually go when they draft.
Well, from the realistic standpoint, I guess they're talking about Fultz, Jackson, and Ball. But those three are not necessarily the best three players. In fact, Tendex has an entirely different order. The Celtics have this great point guard, so it does present a little bit of a problem for them because two of those top three guys, Fultz and Ball, are point guards. So what do you want, 2 point guards? Actually, it would work for them. And the reason is that they could have sort of share the ball, which is, I think, a good thing anyway. I don't think the point guard or a point guard should have it all the time. But if you had two guys who could handle the ball, that would be really good. And both Fultz and Ball are bigger guys. They could be put on defense against the two guard, which is bigger, or who is bigger. And the point man, Thomas, could defend the point. So I don't see that as a problem. The only problem I see is that Tendex has an entirely different way of rating the top players. That these three guys are all good, and that's, not arguing that. In fact, all three of them rank among the top 6 according to Tendex. So these are good. But the team that takes these three guys are not going to be hurting. That really isn't it. I think somebody way down is going to get some really good players. That's what's going to happen.
Well, I think if Boston's going to pick one of these point guards, I'd probably see them taking Fultz, Markelle Fultz from Washington, even though nobody knows anything about this guy. Nobody's ever seen him play. It's crazy. Everybody's talking about this guy. All these media members are talking about a guy they've never even seen play. Washington didn't go to the NCAA tournament. So really, literally, no one has seen this guy play other than a few highlights. But now everybody's an expert, and everybody's saying take Markelle Fultz, even though I would say 90-95% of the media has never seen this guy play. And I know that's a fact. I never saw him play. I never saw him play live in a game all year. I heard about him, and then we've talked about him, and you've done your Tendex rating on him. And to me, this is a lot of the problem with this draft info or intel. Nobody really knows what they're talking about in the media. They're parroting what scouts are telling them. But a lot of the media people who are putting this information out now that you'll be reading for the next month or so really don't know what they're talking about. They really haven't seen any of these players, and they're basically, hey, everybody's going to go with the popular choice. Fultz would probably be a better pick for Boston than Lonzo Ball, because maybe he's more of a 1-2 combo guard. where Ball seems to be more of a pure point guard. How do you see that?
I see it working either way because Ball can play off the ball. I've seen him play off the ball. He's a very good player. He's a very heady player. I don't see the problem as with Ball. He grades out very well. The scouts obviously had scouted him because they had him ranked right up there for the last 3 or 4 months. He has been scouted. The problem is not the scouting that they did with the freshmen. The problem is that they did not scout the upperclassmen right. If you look at the lottery rated by the scouts, or NBADraft.net, if that's basically comes from the scouts, all of them are either freshmen or foreign players. Now, there's something wrong with that because there are not 12 grade freshmen in this class. There are not 12 lottery freshmen in this class.
I don't get this. If you're a senior, you're no good. Tim Duncan was a senior at one time and was drafted and had a I seem to recall, had a very successful NBA Hall of Fame career. I don't get this. We're going to penalize you because you're a senior. And that's what's happening to Sindarius Thornwell from South Carolina, who no one really knew about until the NCAA tournament when South Carolina made a historic run to the Final Four. And let's talk about Sindarius Thornwell a little bit, Dave, because you have some interesting information to tell us about him that I guarantee no one else in the country is even going to touch. So let's talk about him a little bit and how Tendex rates him.
Well, first of all, he was not even the draftable player before the tournament, according to the scouts, because I looked at the NBADraft.net. He was not listed first round or second round. Now they've got him up high in the second round, which is still way, way, way too low. The double problem with Thornwell is, first of all, he's a senior, and they say, well, if he's still around, he can't be any good, which is totally illogical. I mean, some of the greatest players, you talk about Duncan, Oscar Robertson and Will Chamberlain, they had to be seniors in those days, and they certainly were great players. Unfortunately, they lost 3 of their greatest seasons because they couldn't come out earlier. But Thornwell, according to Tendex, is the best player in this draft. He ranks plus 87.8%, which, if you want a comparison, it's about where Harden was. Not as good as Wade, Dwayne Wade, obviously, and way short of Michael Jordan. These were the top 2-rated 2 guards coming out of college. And neither one of them got drafted as high as they should have either. So this is not a first. But with Thornwell, they've got him way, way off. At least Jordan was drafted number 3 and Wade was number 5, even though they were way too low. Thornwell could be a steal for somebody high in the second round. He was not even on the radar for 2 reasons. First of all, they're not really scouting the upperclassmen very well. And secondly, until this year, he wasn't that good. He made a dramatic improvement. He improved by 63% over his junior year.
Wow.
Now, that's ridiculous. The normal rate of improvement is about 5%. Jordan and Stockton were improving in double-figure rates, which was great, and it showed up when they got to the NBA. But this guy improved 63% in the last year. And, I mean, obviously they didn't scout him, and he had one bad half in the NCAA. I believe that was in the semifinal game, but he came back in the second half, played well. He's a cool guy. He's not a gunner. He's just an absolutely good player, good solid player. Plays good defense, cool head, and he really can fill it up. I mean, this guy can really score, and he can rebound. He can distribute. He does all the things you want a player to do.
I have 2 questions about that. First, let's go back to the percentile that you gave him. Tell the listeners a little bit here. You're listening to the John Harris podcast on the airnetwork.net. Speaking now with Tendex originator Dave Herrin. Tendex is the original analytical basketball rating system. What does that percentage? You have them, what, at 88?
Okay.
What does that mean? Tell the listeners. What does that mean?
His freshman and sophomore years, he was about an average two guard. His junior year, his rating was 416, which was pretty good for a two guard. His senior year, his Tendex rating is 660, which for a two guard is, well, think Harden. Okay, you're talking something that's really off the charts and should not be ignored. I mean, the guy is a player. He's just a phenomenal player. Even though he didn't develop until this year, that doesn't change the fact that he's a player.
What does the percentage mean, though? What does that percentage mean? The 88%. What does that percentage mean?
That is the percentage that his rating is above the average for his position. The average for the two guard position is 340. 660 is 87% higher than that average. 87.8%. It's about 88% higher than the norm for a college two guard. Now, you can factor in other things, but for a draft, you don't want to consider minutes played and games missed. You just want to consider how good the guy is. And he's 88% better than the average college two guard.
Now, has Tendex ever shown the rapid improvement ever in the history since you've been doing the draft since 1984? A player has improved that much from one year to the next? Has that ever happened before with Tendex?
I don't think so. We mentioned Jordan and Stockton. Well, that was a classic year. Four absolutely great players and then several other good ones. And Stockton and Jordan were great ones. And they were improving, 15 to 20% per year maybe. They probably increased their ratings from their freshman to their senior year junior year for Jordan, by over 50%. But to improve by 63% in 1 year, I can honestly say that I cannot ever recall that, no.
Now, should we be leery of that and all? That it's such a jump that maybe you say this is a fluke year? And how can the scouts be missing on this guy? Even if they didn't start scouting him until a certain amount of time, he plays in the SEC. How do you overlook a guy like this? How do you overlook a talent like this? And I'm looking at USA Today this week, and they have their first round mock draft, and he's not listed in the first round.
No, he's still listed in the second round, and as I said a couple months ago, he wasn't listed at all. Well, first of all, scouts get some silly things in their heads, and I remember back when I started out with this, they would draft big men just because they were big men, and that's how Olajuwon and Bowie got drafted ahead of Jordan. Now, Olajuwon was a great player, and he should have been drafted number 2, but not ahead of Jordan, and Bowie was a stiff. And then they draft Perkins number 4, and he turns out to be nothing but a stiff. Now the thing is, it's not to draft big men for their sake, but it's to draft freshmen. And I don't know why they get into this kind of mindset. But if you look at the first half, the first 13 or 14 players, a dozen of them are freshmen and 2 of them are foreign players. Now that is obviously wrong. That's clearly wrong. Statistically, ignoring all 3 other classes and putting 12 freshmen ahead of all the other classes, that is statistically way off. I mean, it can't happen. It cannot happen.
No? Sindarius Thornwell, who Tendex has ranked as the number 1 player in this year's draft, to Paul Millsap, who Tendex rated as the number 4 player. I think it was a 2006 draft. And Paul Millsap was a second-round draft pick. Has had a very good NBA career. Are there any similarities there? And another senior player that's been overlooked by the scouts?
Yeah, it's just a different reason for being overlooked. There have been many, John. As you know, there are literally dozens. Dennis Rodman was a classic example. Yeah. Second-round guy who should have been way up there. And there's a guy like him in this draft, Jordan Bell.
Yeah,
and
talk about him.
He's likely to fall into the second round also because he's a junior. I mean, the scouts are getting paid big bucks, but they continually do things that make Tendex look great. Because if you track down the history for 25 years, Tendex ratings, and not perfect by any means, were 5 out of 8 better than the scouts. And when the scouts are making millions and millions and millions of dollars and a statistical formula is beating them, there's something very wrong with the way they're scouting. That's the only thing I can say. They get things in their heads, and then they leave out everything else. It seems to be what they do.
Before we close out the John Harris podcast here on the ednetwork.net, Dave, is there another player that we need to talk about here, underrated, overrated in the lottery? Is there somebody that we're missing or somebody that's being talked about too much?
Well, underrated would be Jordan Bell. He should definitely be in the lottery, maybe in the top 10. He can play defense a lot like the Worm. He's very wormy, squirmy, just like Rodman. Zach Collins, the two Collinses. Zach Collins is a freshman, but he should be up there in the top 3.
Gonzaga, he was very impressive in the NCAA tournament.
Right, and John Collins, who's a sophomore, looks like he's going to fall to the 14 or 15, and the team that gets him is going to do really well. He's a sophomore, heaven forbid he's not a freshman.
He's too old. He's a sophomore. He's too old.
That's right. So he'll probably drop to the middle of the first round. But he should be in the top 5, at least according to Tendex.
Luke Kennard, another player that you mentioned, who's also a sophomore from Duke, is rated lower than his teammate Jason Tatum, who's a freshman. Not rated lower by Tendex.
Tendex agrees. Yeah, Tendex agrees with that one. I went through it, and Tatum does have a higher rating than Kennard. But neither one of them is really lottery material. They just happen to play for Duke.
Because I've seen Tatum listed as high as number 5.
No, he's not that high. He's in the top 15. Kennard is a little bit lower than that. But Duke guys always get overrated, as history shows, with a few exceptions. But many Duke guys have been overrated.
Well, Dave, we're going to have to come back. We're going to have to revisit as we get closer to the draft. We're going to have to talk about Tendex. We're going to narrow this down and really come up with where we think the mistakes are going to be made in this upcoming draft, because there's going to be some made. And I want to stay on this in Darius Thornwell. We'll see over the next few weeks if his draft stock rises. I don't know how it's going to rise. He's not playing in any games. So we'll see if he's even mentioned as possibly getting into the first round. This could be a huge Tendex victory, maybe as big as Tendex has ever had, as we proceed on and have the draft and move into next season.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of the John Harris Podcast. Join us again next week for John Harris exclusively on the airnetwork.net.